About 3 months ago, I was at an antique festival and it was raining, and I found these two coffee grinder carcasses sitting outside in the rain getting wet and rusting. They're missing the crank, missing a bunch of pieces. The hopper has been replaced by a couple jars, but I'm going to convert these two into a lamp. The first step into converting this into a lamp is to take it apart and see what it consists of. So I'm going to loosen these bolts. Guess we need to take off the label they had. Oh yuck, it's all rusty. Okay, I'm going to loosen these, and fortunately they're not too tight where I need the screwdriver. So we will take these and save them in case we want to use them later on for this project or for another project. Okay, I took apart one of the two coffee grinders, and as you can see, it has a grinding mechanism which can be removed. Now, I don't like the fact that it was missing a few pieces, and I don't want to get rid of this grinding mechanism over here to make a lamp because I'm going to need the inside for the wiring and whatnot. Also, you can see they use some electrical tape for this jar, so I can keep that in mind just in case I need to use electrical tape, but I want to use two jars that are equal in size. Now, one thing I would like to do is take this, the grinding mechanism from the grinder, and implement it into the design in some way. If you look at this piece here protrudes out from below this, so I can't use this as a base for the lamp, so I'm going to have to improvise. In the meantime, let us focus on the other portions of the lamp. Okay, so I found a jar like this, which I plan to put in here, but as you can see, it slips in too easily. I could use electrical tape, but I'm just going to use the lid, and then it should clamp in nicely. So anyway, it will be a little tighter, but it's going to clamp like this. And then I'll have the light bulb in here. But for now, we're going to work on setting up the lamp itself, or the structure of the lamp, that is. To set up the lamp, or the actual structure of the lamp, I'm going to be using copper piping and different fittings. So I used 3/8 of an inch copper pipe. I really like the 1/4 inch better, but for this I want to make sure it's going to be strong enough because copper is a soft metal. And I have an assortment of different fittings. I have several of the T-shape, of the 45-degree angle shape. This one is from 3/8 to 1/2, and you'll see why I wanted that size, and some end caps to make it look nice and tidy. I also bought this tool. I haven't used it yet, so I can cut the pipe fittings. In the past I've used a Dremel, but I'm going to try this. It seems like it would save time and give a nice clean cut. So I'm going to have a T-fitting leading down this way, and then the copper tubing coming this way. So I want a copper tube like this, so I'll have to cut it here, and then extending a little further. But I don't know how far I'm going to extend it because I need to see how far the two pieces are going to be apart from each other. To determine how far I want the two lighting mechanisms from each other, the two individual lights, that is, I need to first pick out a base. So I have this base here, and it's a piece of picket, and you can see this side will be the bottom just because that was against a piece of wood and it's not as nicely oxidized as here or weathered. So I'm going to have this like that. So I'm going to want to space these out so they're going to be roughly at a nice distance for the size of the picket. So I'm going to have to cut that in the center accordingly. Okay, so I lined these up to see exactly where I want them and made sure they're centered, and I lined it up on this side to be equal to the other side. Now the other side was broken, but it's a nice weathered piece. I'm not going to cut it to size. I want to keep the weathered look. So I measured from here to there so it can match from here to here. I know it's not covering up the nail holes, but I'm not going to worry about that. If anything, I can trim the nails and have them stick in there looking all weathered just to give it a certain appeal, but for a project like this, because I don't want to refinish those coffee grinders, but I want to leave the old paint job they have, it's going to be nice looking rustic. Now I know the copper piping isn't rustic, but it will not take too long, maybe a few years, and it will be nice and dark again, and or not again, but how it's supposed to be. So I went ahead and drilled a couple holes, one there and the other over here, and those are going to be the holes where basically I'm going to take the base of this and it's going to sit nicely, and this will be flush, and that's how the coffee grinder is going to stand. Okay, so what I want to do now is, this looks ugly and rusty, so I want the spring to be pushed down, and to push it down I need to have something to push it down, which I'm going to use the piping, but this piece gets stuck. So that's where I have the 3/8 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch extender, so I can, or coupler, so I can do that. And then this can be pushed down on it. But to hold that down, I need to have a bolt. And I had to go and shop for one that was metric that will screw on, because the other ones will strip it. Okay, so I'm going to have this pushed down to tighten, but then we run into another problem. So what we run into is we push this down, and then I don't know if you guys can see that, probably not, but there's not enough room for this bolt. So I can't tighten this by hand. And another predicament is the socket bit that goes in here for that won't fit in here. So what am I supposed to do? Well, I went to the garage and I took a couple of these bolts, and using the cutoff wheel of the Dremel, I basically cut a groove. So I cut the groove, which means now I can take a flathead screwdriver over here, through there, and tighten. So before I tighten, I'm going to have to cut a section of pipe to go in here, because I don't want this to be shifted a little bit, so this will be nice and lined up. Okay, so I basically got these two pieces cut, one for each side. So I'm going to stick this over here. And apparently that copper pipe isn't going to go through, so we're not going to use these, we're just going to have to line it up. Then I'll have to put this piece in here. Okay, so I sort of got it in, but that's not good enough. So I'm going to have to work some more magic on this. Now earlier when I was cutting, the edge of the copper was a little sharp and it cut my finger. So you need to be careful as you do these projects. Okay, so we put the cap on right now, and that's how it looks. And that's going to be the base. So what I did was I cut some more of these. This will go in here, and that will go in there. It will look like that, going up to the rest of the grinder where the lighting will be. Okay, I went ahead and got this glued in with super glue. Now one thing to note, you see this seam here on this pipe and right there? I had them lined up to make sure this is going to be horizontal, because once the super glue sets, it sets. Okay, so I put this on the side, and now we have to determine how high we want this. I think about there is good. Now this piece is going to come out from here, and then this will stand up there, so I'll measure that distance, which looks about 4 inches. And I think about 4 inches will be good, so I'll have to cut 2 pieces, one for each side, about 4 inches. Okay, so I ended up going with about 4.5 inches, and you want to make sure these are cut as perfectly as you can to be exactly the same length. Okay, so I went ahead and added super glue, and this is what it looks like. So that's going to be the base of the lamp. Now, one thing I did to get this securely fastened over here is I ended up, instead of putting the screw in from the top, I slid it in so it fit in here because this area is wide, and then here's wide, here's narrow. So as I slid it in here, it got to come here and then catch on it, and I was able to turn this nut and hold this piece in place nicely. For this lamp, each light is going to have its own switch, and then I'm going to have a master switch for both, just because it might be a great idea to have 3 switches on a lamp, or for overkill. Anyway, I'm going to use these turn switches, and we have these pieces, and they're going to go on the front of the grinder. Okay, so I have my finger making sure that bolt is level. I'll put that in there, so I'll put it that way, and then run this through here. And you see that bolt turned, so we have to make sure it's level until it grabs, and then it will work well. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is this piece is going to come here like that. Then I'll have another piece like that going down to the stand we're building. And I measured that this should be about 3 inches. It will go out, and I can put the end cap. And then around 1 inch inwards, I'll drill a hole, and I'll run a screw through. Okay, so now I want to get the pipe assembled on the back. And I have this designed to mount this way, so it will go like this. And this sticks a little high, so I'm going to have to trim one of these pipe ends. But as you can see, when I cut this piece at 3 inches, it's protruding too far, so I want it a little bit closer, so I'm probably going to shave 1/4 inch off there. So now, as you can see, being a little shorter, when I put the end cap on, it's going to look better. Now what I need to do, as you can see, is this is about a finger width too thick. I don't really want to trim this end that is in contact with the grinder because that will be a little sharp, but that might be the end I'll have to trim because that's not going to be stuck, and here I'll have to cut a small piece of copper to go in here to get this fitting right. So I'm going to have to trim the edge that fits on there. And when you look at it this way, grabbing another piece and lining it up, it's almost the entire width, so I'm going to have to use the tool and cut to about there. Okay, so I ended up trimming with a Dremel because this tool didn't give me enough distance, and this will go over here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is with this piece, as I mount this over here, I'm going to have to figure out how much this goes there to be in the middle from one end to the next. So what I'm going to have to do is, the simplest method would be to measure from here to there. Of course, these aren't going to be perfectly straight until I have the rest of the unit installed, so it's going to give me really a ballpark figure. And this ballpark figure is about 12 3/4 inches almost, but not quite. Anyway, I'm going to have this come over, and then with that gap I cut, the wire will come under and lip through, and that should hold this. That would be a nice tight fit here, like that. So, but I'm going to have this like this as a guide to where to put the hole here. So then I'll have to mark there and drill a hole. Ouch, poked myself with the pencil. Okay, and that's where the hole's going to be, basically right there. Now, one thing to note, as far as screws go, I bought these machine screws. I didn't want the largest size that fits in here, and I didn't want one too small. This does look a little teeny, but I'd rather go a little on the smaller side than on the bigger side. And the reason being is, if you look at the thickness of the pipe, when this goes through, there's not going to be space for wire to go past it. Another thing I did was I used a finer thread versus a coarser thread. because the finer thread has thinner nuts than the wider thread. So that's one secret I used. And because this is going in all the way through a little bit too far, as I demonstrated, what I did was using my Dremel cutoff tool, I took 4 because I need 4, stuck this in and cut it off. So then when I put the nut in there, it's going to be a tight fit and there will be a gap towards the other end for the wires to go through. Well, make sure you put a little oil where you're drilling and using general purpose drill bit, and it's going to take a while, but eventually you'll drill a hole through the pipe. Okay, so I went ahead and drilled through, and I used a drill bit that was just perfect where I may not even need to squeeze the nut through there because it looks like there may not be enough space and I'll have lots of space for the wires. I went ahead and put this thing, although I didn't glue it in yet because I'm going to run the wire through. Okay, so here is what it looks mounted on there. Of course, it's not level. And let me show you the back side. So here it is from the back. Once I get the other piece, it will be like that, and the wire will come through here and in and out the hole that's down there. And next I need to get this part coming through. So I cut the 2 pieces of pipe, and one turned out to be slightly longer than the next, but I'm not worried because these are going to be a little longer than necessary. I just want to first get this piece with the right hole for the screw, and then I'll measure the intersection and know where to cut accordingly. Okay, so I measured the line and I tried to drill, but the drill drifts. So using the edge of a flathead screwdriver, I put it in here and I can push down and make a little area so that the drill can grab into the right location. So here I am priding myself on how perfectly I lined this hole. So I'm happy about that. And here I am priding myself on the other side as well. Okay, so standing these vertically, you can see there is some overlap. So what I'm going to have to do is measure exactly where the center is and line this up accordingly and then know exactly where to trim each pipe. Now what I'll have to do is measure from here to there and make sure it's identical from here to here before I cut, so that these two would be the right length when I do cut them. I just made 2 very clean cuts. Awesome. Now one thing I'm going to do is measure from right over here all the way to the bottom of the base, and that was around, let's see, we have to get this level, so about 8.5 inches almost. Okay, so I cut another one of these little connectors. It's going to go down here, and I'm going to shape it like that. So setting it down flat before the glue sets will make this perfectly flush versus that turned, because you want it exactly opposite. Okay, so I measured from the edge of the inner hole all the way to the edge of the wider piece of this T-section, and it was around 2.25 inches. So the 8.5 I measured from here all the way to the base, minus the 2.25 inches, is what I'm going to cut the next piece of pipe. Okay, so I have the switch, and I have this piece that came with it, so I'm going to put that in here. If I can get this in there. Okay, so it also came with a nut to secure it. Now this nut I want to fit in here, but I had to sand the corners so that it can fit. So what I'm going to do is now set it in here. It's nice and snug, and then I'll apply a little bit of super glue just so it doesn't move around too much. Once it's snug in there, based on the hex shape, it shouldn't turn so that the switch can turn. So anyway, I'm going to apply some super glue. Okay, so we'll just let this dry for a few minutes, and that's going to be like that. This like that. So I'll have to run this wire through here and then into there. So then I have the switch and I have that screw, so it's coming in through here. So then I can turn this to get it tight, to get it to screw in. So I'm trying to get it to screw in without that turning. So it's a little tricky, but not undoable. Okay, so I went ahead and connected the pipe. Now I can glue these and assemble it, and then this extra slack will go onto the cord for the lamp. Okay, so this is how it is. I had to set it flat with this part hanging out so it can be perfect. So I had to get this thinner cable, and as you can see, it is thinner than that, so 2 layers of these would be easier to run through the 3/8 inch copper piping I'm using versus this one here. Okay, so I went ahead and connected the switch to the wires, and on the other wire I spliced halfway down to another side so that now they're both connected on this, on a certain circuit so that I can control each light individually. And as you can see with the copper piping, these are thin enough they should fit through here. And then I can put that here and have one section go there and one there. So now let us get this working. So I'm going to run the pipe through here and hopefully it can easily go. Oh yeah, awesome. You see how it goes in easily? That is great because that means I am not moving around the electrical tape and causing cuts in it and tears, etc. And then this piece here will have to be re-glued also. So let me add a little bit of super glue. I could actually solder these if I wanted to, but for our light, since we're not doing piping, super glue is going to just suffice because it's going to make it nice and tight without the need to worry about the soldering showing and making it look uglier. This was just a little tidier, theoretically, of course. Okay, so we have that in. Now we can run this piece in. And to do that, we're going to have to take both sides of these, have one curve this way, one that way, so when I run them through, they go in opposite directions. Not like that in the same direction, but opposite. So this, what I'll do is I'll bend it this way, so as I run it through, it goes there. So that is how we do it. And now I have a little scratch. I'm going to have this go to the back side so it's not visible from the front. And there we go. This will be turned. Okay, so now I need to run these 2 wires through the pipe and then into the inside of the coffee grinder. So we'll have to do them one at a time. Okay, so you see I have the wire running up here, coming through this segment of pipe, in here and down and out, and it's going to go through that hole. So I'm going to do that with both grinding units. Okay, so I made an error. Initially I had it come out of here, but that's going to actually mount onto the base, so I had to have it come out of the section of the T-pipe which I already cut. So this wire coming through and into here is going to be a tight fit, but that won't be a problem. So I have 2 of these jars which will be the globes for the lights, and I have a couple small sockets, and I'm going to have to drill 2 holes into the lid for the socket to sit, and then another hole or 2 for the electrical wires to go through. Okay, so here is how I have it wired. I have the wire coming out to the switch and coming up onto the socket. As you can see, I have the socket screwed, but if you look here, I had to trim the screw so it can fit up here. So as you can see, you can turn this around and get it to fit in here to reassemble this back onto the unit. Apparently I clamped it on too tight and I broke the jar. So what I'm gonna have to do is figure something out that won't let the jar break in the future as it's being clamped on. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is trace this outline or cut to that shape on a piece of foam padding. So you can get foam padding from a craft store. They're very, very cheap. They're like $1 or so per sheet, give or take. So I'm going to basically set this on top of the foam padding and cut around the edge and then cut in the inside. So I put it on there and trace and cut a groove with a screwdriver. So that's roughly where I'm going to cut. And then I'll just cut on the inside to do like an outline, because if you look at the actual grinding mechanism, there's a slight outline here. So as you can see, it's right over there. So I'll have the foam in between this groove. It will add some padding and create a little extra width near the top. So when I put the jar on there, the lid won't be clamped on too tight onto the thing. Okay, so here is what happens when you poke yourself against the glass. So I'm going to have to remove this stuff so I don't get any more gushers. Okay, so as you can see, this thing fits. Ow, I just cut myself again on the glass. This thing fits. I'll cut this to make sure this section is correct and have a hole here and a hole there and there for the screws, and this will be perfect. Okay, so right over here, if you can see, the lamp needs to be a little higher. So this piece was cut a little short, but it's not really a problem. It's actually probably better because I can now use this piece, put that there. It will be the right height, and it will give me a nice flat base to set on the table. So I put that T-shape piece down here, but as you can see, it could be raised, but it doesn't get raised high enough for putting one of the end caps on there. So what I have is a system to put an end cap on there. Okay, so I'm in the process of trimming the end of the end cap to shorten it. And in order to do that, I'm using the needle nose pliers to put through here to turn this. So it's very tedious, but it's the way to do it. Okay, so here is the piece I trimmed and the central stud. I had to clean the edge from the sharp metal after you cut it so that this piece can fit in, and I put some foam padding and banged it with a wrench just to make sure it's nice and secure. This piece turned out to be a little long, so I had to trim it, and that was tedious being a short piece. I have a slight cut here, but I put foam as I turned this to make sure that I don't cut myself. Now right over here is the hole, and the thing about these holes I drilled, they're a little bit wider than this. You don't want it too tight, but you don't want it too loose. If this is on here, then the weight of the lamp can make this fall over. Okay, so I cut a piece of foam pad which will go here, and what I'm going to do is fold it into a semicircle and cut some slits. I'm going to cut one like that, like that, like that. So I'm making like a pie. And then this will go here, and it will be a wedge when I put it in here because the foam pad will compress. It will be a tight fit, and it will be nice and snug. So let us try it. I'm going to put this on here, make sure it's centered over there, and press. Okay, on the underside of the platform that the lamp will be mounted on, I have these foam pads which have an adhesive, so I'll peel it off and I'll stick at least a couple here and there just to provide a nice padding when I set it down on any surface. Now using the section I cut off from the stud that went on the inside of that, I used it as a template, and I cut a piece of foam padding that's adhesive, and this way I can have something small that will go in the base on the plug at the bottom of the copper pipe that leads out to the power. So here, as you can see, the fixture is white. I didn't find a black one. So what I did was I cut a piece of foam padding to the outer edge of the jar. So I cut a circle, so I made a nice donut. I found these tiny 7.5 watt bulbs that I'm going to try in there. So basically I'll screw this in. I'm going to have to stick this in there like that. Just curve it in so that it's on the inside of the jar. And you want to make sure the light bulb is snug and that you don't break it. So this is going to be a little tricky, but it's doable. Okay, so once everything is assembled and all the pipe fittings are tight, we need to take the other end that plugs into the wall and put a plug on it. Now this plug here, it's too wide and I used a thinner cable, so I'm actually going to use a plug like this that clamps on, and I couldn't find black to match, but it should be okay. I almost forgot the nails, so I cut off the long pieces and I just stuck the heads in there just to make it look more normal versus having a couple gaping holes in there that people are wondering, what's this lamp with 2 holes? So anyway, after I finished it, I went ahead and put the nails back in there. So here we have the finished lamp, and we have the central switch. We also have individual switches if I want only one of them. And I can decide which one I want, whether I want the right or the left light. And there we go. There is my final product.